Today I want to talk about a virtue that almost nobody talks about and very few people have. It is civility. Civility is a lost virtue, so thoroughly forgotten that even when it is appropriate to talk about it, people usually talk about something else, free speech. When people hear the word civility, they usually think of polite behavior in conversation, particularly between people who might be tempted to be rude to each other, such as political adversaries. If civility is just a matter of being polite, it sounds less serious than a moral virtue. Maybe we agree that people should not be rude, but if they are rude, have they done something morally wrong? That in itself deserves some discussion. But I think that civility is much more extensive and interesting than that, as you will see in the essay by Cheshire Calhoun. She says that civility is not mere courtesy. Here is a working definition. Civility is a distinctly social virtue central to open political discourse and reasoned disagreement. It involves restraint governed by social conventions that regulate the expression of respect and tolerance. What distinguishes civility from respect or tolerance is that it is fundamentally communicative, requiring that our speech and manner convey to others that we respect them even when our disagreement is deep. So feeling respectful is not enough. Civility requires that we act that way. And it requires that we act that way whether or not we feel respectful. We can't always control our feelings, but we can control our behavior and the messages it conveys to others. What civility requires, no doubt, depends upon the context. If you are having a political debate with friends in your dorm, I assume that the standards for civility are looser than the standards in a classroom. That doesn't mean you should respect your dorm mates less than your classmates, but it means that behavior is interpreted differently in one context than in another. A classroom is still pretty informal. How about the standards of behavior that we expect on the floor of the U.S. Senate? How should people interviewed on a news channel behave when confronted with a challenging question? In these contexts, the conversation is viewed by many people who are watching it for the purpose of helping them acquire an informed belief about some important public issue. It does not help the viewer to watch people fight or insult each other. Last week, we looked at virtues of intellectual carefulness, attentiveness, thoroughness, open-mindedness, humility, and a general love of truth that is the basic good we seek when we form and revise our beliefs. Civility is a virtue for civil society because incivility prevents open-minded and intellectually careful debate and makes it very difficult for citizens to get the truth about important issues. Whenever someone acts uncivilly, someone will bring up the topic of free speech. Free speech is a constitutionally protected right of citizens to express their opinions and attitudes without fear of legal sanction. That does not mean that society should tolerate uncivil behavior. But the boundaries are tricky because, again, it depends upon the context. Nobody would say that a news agency is violating somebody's rights because they choose not to interview a person on the grounds that that person acts uncivilly. But what if a university refuses to let that person speak on campus? Is there a difference? So suppose somebody says something insulting to an individual or about a group of people, religious, racial, ethnic. We can ask ourselves what category this speech falls into. Here are three possibilities to consider. One is that it falls outside the boundaries of free speech. It should not be protected legally, and the person should be subject to legal sanctions. A second possibility is that it falls within the category of speech legally protected by the Constitution, but it should not be socially tolerated. being uncivil would be a reason not to socially tolerate it. A third possibility is that the speech should be both legally protected and socially tolerated, even if disgusting or outrageous, because we aim to have a society as open as possible. Now let's look at some examples. In a well-publicized and controversial case, Professor Stephen Saleta was offered a tenured senior position at the University of Illinois at Urbana, subject to final approval by the chancellor. After he had accepted the offer and resigned his previous job, he posted some strongly anti-Semitic remarks on Twitter. The offer from Illinois was withdrawn because of that behavior. The second case is an extremely well-publicized case at OU, where some members of a fraternity were expelled and the whole fraternity kicked off campus because of a racist chant sung on a bus while going to a party. Which category do these cases fall into? My own opinion is that they are constitutionally protected free speech, so they're not in the first category. I also think they're not in the third category, speech that we should socially tolerate. So I think that both cases fall into the second category, the category of uncivil behavior that we as a society must publicly condemn. But what should be the penalties for such behavior? Is losing a job or getting expelled the correct penalty? What ways do we have to show that behavior is socially unacceptable? We will discuss that in class. The inflammatory nature of these cases might make it hard for us to talk about something that I think is important. Does anything fall into the second category? I think it is important that we hold each other to standards of civility in our behavior that are necessary for a well-functioning society. If we don't criticize uncivil behavior publicly, then incivility disappears as a category, and we become more and more uncivil as a society.